How do we know that it's the right thing to do to be a good person, for example, to just, give back to others, maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter? Seek truth and question assumptions. Even if it's something that I, as your father, am telling you, question it. Seek truth. I would actually hear professors say things like, well, belief in God started because people didn't know how to explain things before science, and that's the only reason anyone ever believes. And now that I have studied a little bit of philosophy, I'm no expert, but now that I've just cracked the surface on it, I think, I cannot believe that people got away with saying that at an institution of higher learning. I mean, have you never read the ancient Greek philosophers? I mean, you might not agree with them, but there's this whole wealth of knowledge that they were not drawing from.
Hello guys, so today I just want us to watch this beautiful case from Jennifer Fulwiler. She shares her story and that journey moving from being an atheist to becoming a Christian and accepting Jesus, accepting his gospel, accepting his person. And today she shares her journey and her stories with us. Let's watch out and see.
I have no memories of believing in anything supernatural, not even when I was a child. I would sit in the class down at Rita Murphy Elementary, and sometimes, I think it was actually here in Bismarck, that a girl asked me, she said, have you made him the Lord of your life? And I actually said, who? It never occurred to me to believe in anything like that, and I certainly had no religious training. My parents, mainly my dad, had this idea that they wanted to be good people just for the sake of being good people. They are, to this day, they are very kind and generous individuals, and my dad especially really liked this idea of, why don't we do good out of the goodness of our hearts? You may have heard this before from people who don't believe. Why do we need a God, threatening us with hell to do the right thing? Can't we just do the right thing on our own? And that made perfect sense to me. It was really my dad who was the atheist of the family, and he was raised, I think, a kind of non-practicing Methodist, but he started to ask some tough questions when he was a teen, and he didn't get answers, so he was, pretty open about his atheism. My mother is what philosophers call a Macyist, and that's someone who is far more concerned with whether Macy's has an additional 30% off this weekend than whether there's a compelling case for a monotheistic God. So, my dad would say, and if he were here, and he actually thought about coming, which would have been weird, if he were here, I think that he would say that he did not raise me to be an atheist per se. He was really big on this idea of seek truth and question assumptions. Even if it's something that I, as your father, am telling you, question it. Seek truth. And so that would end up being a very important part of my childhood, that it wasn't just we're atheists, so go be an atheist. It was seek truth, question assumptions. And so I did, and as a young person, that seemed to lead me to atheism. I went to college. I actually started out at a very religious public university, and I transferred to the University of Texas at Austin because it had a reputation for being very secular. At my previous university, it was like, they'd have Bible studies and stuff, and I got to UT and I thought, atheists, yeah, this is much more like it. So the college atheists who I hung out with, and really even some of the professors, they were really a testament to just how much our education system has lost a sense of history when it comes to philosophy and the liberal arts. I mean, I would actually hear professors say things like, well, belief in God started because people didn't know how to explain things before science, and that's the only reason anyone ever believes. And now that I have studied a little bit of philosophy, I'm no expert, but now that I've just cracked the surface on it, I think, I cannot believe that people got away with saying that at an institution of higher learning. I mean, have you never read the ancient Greek philosophers? I mean, you might not agree with them, but there's this whole wealth of knowledge that they were not drawing from. And what it reminds me of is one of my very favorite quotes ever, sums up this whole phenomenon. It was the London Review of Books, their review of, I believe it was The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, otherwise known as your atheist relative's favorite book, I'm sure. What they said, and I can just hear the British accent, I wish I could imitate it. They said of The God Delusion, Imagine someone holding forth on biology whose only knowledge of the subject is the British Book of Birds, and you have a rough idea of what it feels like to read Richard Dawkins on theology. So, I love that, and that really perfectly encapsulates what I experienced among atheists, even in a university setting. And it was interesting, though, because we like to have these discussions. We like to ask big questions and, think tough thoughts that the Christians supposedly weren't thinking. But I began to notice some problems would come up that people couldn't really answer that well. For example, someone asked one time in an atheist group that I was meeting with, how do we know that it's the right thing to do to be a good person, for example, to just, give back to others, maybe volunteer at a homeless shelter? Because the group that I was with, they were really into that. They really did want to be good people, like my parents, serve the community, give back. And so they said, from an atheistic point of view, obviously we're not like those silly Christians whose God tells them what to do. But so how do we know that it's the right thing to do? And the person in the room who was considered, very intellectual and knowledgeable said, oh, well, yes, if you look at evolution, you can see that humans thrive. They function best when they are in peaceful communities. It leads to harmony, and therefore we have a gene, it's, hardwired into us to seek peaceful communities. But I was sitting there thinking, well, yeah, but you can also look at the evidence from evolution to see that evolution kind of favors survival of the fittest, too, the strong dominating the weak. So it seems like from a purely atheist materialist perspective, you could also concoct a moral code in which beating up the weak and the poor and stealing their stuff so that you can be rich and your offspring can survive seems like that could also be perfectly justifiable from the atheist materialist perspective. And when I would bring up these issues to sum up, there were a lot of discussions, but one summary of the typical response I got was along the lines of, shut up. Because again, a lot of these people wanted to be good people, and so they thought that I was saying, atheists want to be bad people or something, and I said, no, I just want to know how we derive a moral code from our own belief system, because it seems to me like you can't. And when I go toe-to-toe with atheists in the blog world, which is always a pleasure, because you know how wonderful people are when hiding behind the anonymity of the internet, that is one of the things that comes up a lot, that really sets people on fire when you bring up this question of how can you deduce a moral code. They don't have an answer. I waited for a good answer when I was in college. I still have not gotten one. So I had those questions in my mind, but I was still very much an atheist, because one thing that my dad instilled in me well was this idea of you might not like where the truth leads you. It might not be comfortable, but you follow the truth nonetheless. We look for what is true, not what makes us feel good. And so I was concerned about these issues of moral code, but in the spirit of seeking truth, I was still committed to being an atheist. The first thing that just made me, really question even more than I already had been, that made me start to consider at least theism, was when I met the man who is now my husband. So he has an interesting story. He was raised by a single mother, grew up very, very poor, so much so that they often couldn't even afford to run the heat in the winter, which is sad, but it was Texas. I mean, it wasn't like, here. And so her big thing, because she grew up in poverty, like no running water poverty. And so her big thing was, you've got to get out of poverty, you've got to seek success. And she had heard on movies and TV shows of these places called Yale and Harvard. And so knowing nothing about it, the blind leading the blind here, she was like, well, I think you should go to one of these schools. And my husband had never heard of him. He was just a kid from, small town Texas. And he said, okay, I guess I will. And so he went to Yale undergrad, graduated with honors, Columbia Law School, Stanford Business School, and did most of the coursework towards a master's in computer science while he was at Stanford. So no one could say he wasn't a pretty smart guy. So after we started dating, and I just assumed he was an atheist because, atheism is for the intelligentsia, right? very much bought into that stereotype. And so one day something about the subject of religion came up, and he I forget what it was, but he said something that indicated that he believed in God. I said, God, whoa, what was that? Wow, that's crazy. And then he said the C word. He said he considered himself a Christian. I was just, I really, it was like, this is a dream, a bad dream, I need to wake up now. I couldn't believe what he had just said. And so, but one of my first questions was a natural question. I was like, well, I have never seen you go to church. I have never seen you read the Bible. And, this is Austin. So he's like, oh, no, but I'm a Christian. You don't need to do anything, pray, go to church. Like, no, I'm still a Christian. Because he had a really profound experience. He did a full dunk baptism in a Baptist church when he was 13, and he said, I experienced something, and I know Christ is real, and I have no idea what to do about it, but I know that that he is real. And so I met some of his friends, some of these people who, from law school, so these people had degrees that I could not even pronounce. And some of them claimed to be Christian, people who their intellects blew me away. And so that was the first time that I had to let go of that silly stereotype that smart people aren't religious. And looking back, when I first gave this talk, I actually didn't even mention that, because now it sounds so ignorant to say that I actually believed that smart people are never religious. But, that's the thing when you buy into stereotypes. Stereotypes always come from, you have this little worldview and you want to protect it, and so you make a stereotype so that everything in your world fits, very neatly within your perception, and you just get further and further into it. You further and further isolate yourself from reality. So that's what I had done, and hanging out with these really intellectual, really smart people was the first time that I thought, okay, I need to stop saying that belief in God is insane. I need to stop saying that no reasonable person could ever believe in God, because these people are really smart. They are very reasonable, and they believe in God. I didn't think they were right, but that was a first step. I let go of those silly stereotypes. So Joe and I got married, and this confirmed for me that he wasn't that religious, because we decided to reinvent the wheel on the wedding. We got married in a theater, and I wore a dark purple dress, and we had all these ideas. We were gonna sign a contract, and we wrote our own vows. It was kind of a mess. But we learned a valuable lesson, one that I hope none of your children ever need to know. But if you are going to reinvent the wheel on a 2,000-year-old tradition or older, you might want to rehearse it first, because for all of these ideas about what our wedding was going to be like, we never timed it. And so we had all of these people that Joe knew flying in from all over the world. And I get up on the stage, and I have a dark purple dress on, and it was only 7 minutes, because we kind of didn't time that. And so as I was walking out, people were like, so I just flew in from London she just walked up there and now it's done. So anyway, little lesson learned on when you go against thousands and thousands of years of tradition. So a year later, our first child was born, and that was the real starting point of my conversion. You can see that the stage had kind of already been set. I was already thinking a certain direction. But when I held that baby, that was the first moment of realizing that there were some real problems with atheism, and that it was time to address them. Because, in the spirit of another thing that my dad always taught me was this idea of follow your beliefs to their logical conclusions. Don't just say you believe something, but then don't walk the walk when the going gets tough. You have to follow your belief to their logical conclusions. And so I held my newborn son, this amazing miracle, and I was like, what a gorgeous, randomly evolved set of chemical reactions. What is the atheism is nonsense. What is this? Because I remembered it when I was in college. There was this professor, I can't think of his name. Some of you have probably heard of him. He made the statement, he's a big atheist, he made the statement that it would be more morally acceptable to kill a newborn baby than an adult pig, because pigs are more cognitively complex. And that has stayed with me all those years, because at the time that I read that paper, I was like, this is garbage. He's making atheists look bad. And I was like, that is wrong because, well, actually, because when people would ask me, every now and then I'd accidentally run into a religious person and even more accidentally get in a conversation about it. And sometimes they would ask me questions like, how do you know that human life is more valuable than, say, a gnat? And I would say, like, oh, well, and this is, quoting from other atheists, I'd say, well, obviously, we're more cognitively complex and we're more aware of the world. And so essentially complexity is how you derive value. And I looked at my newborn son and I thought, well, I mean, pigs are pretty smart. I mean, like, the pig is more cognitively complex than this newborn. And I realized that by my own atheist materialist worldview, I was saying that my baby was not as valuable as an adult human being because he was not as cognitively complex. So that was wrong. And then the biggest moment was when I sensed this love that I felt for him. And again, in the spirit of being, intellectually honest, I said, okay, where does this love come from that I'm experiencing? I thought, well, it's just a feeling, it's just chemical reactions in my brain, and I thought, that's not true. That is not true. I know that the love that I feel for my son and that I've experienced in this little family of ours has a source that is somewhere outside of us. I don't know what it is, I don't know who it is, but I know that it's there. And that if the whole world blew up tomorrow and there was nothing left of us, that love would still be real and it would still exist. And that was the moment, thank you, it's true. And that was the moment that I was no longer an atheist. I didn't know what I was, but I was not an atheist. So I figured, because I grew up in Texas, we have religious people there, I figured that now is when I was supposed to say a prayer, but I never tried that. And I was not clear on how you distinguish talking to yourself from talking to God. But I gave it a shot. I literally said, I was like, is this thing on? Like, how do I know when I'm talking to, or I thought maybe there could be gods. It's Austin, we're open-minded. I don't know. I didn't know what I was talking to, but I just sent out this really lame prayer just saying, if anyone is out there, this source of that love, like, I sense something, I know it's there. Whatever is at the source of this love, like, holla at me, like, let me know, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next, but, let me know that you're there. And what I didn't realize at the time is that I was actually responding to the grace of God that had already begun to work in my life, undoubtedly due to the prayers of many of the wonderful people that I met throughout my life that knew I was an atheist and were praying for me. I love this quote from the Catechism where it says, God calls man first. The living and true God tirelessly calls each person to that mysterious encounter known as prayer. In prayer, God's initiative of love always comes first. Our own first step is always a response. And so little did I know, I was simply responding to this hand that had been extended to me for so long. And that's a tip, by the way, for your loved ones who have fallen away. Encourage them to just pray. And I know they'll laugh. They'll say, that's ridiculous. Why would I pray? I don't believe in God. But what do you have to lose? All right, so you spend 2 minutes talking to yourself. How hard is that? Because as you'll see, when we get later into my story, that really started things in motion. That really opened a door for me, that first prayer, as lame as it was. What I did not understand, and this is another thing that you might want to convey if you suggest this to non-believers, is I thought that prayer was kind of an instantaneous thing. Like, you put the card into the ATM machine and you get money. I thought that, like, I would say the prayer and then if there were a God or something, he would do something, like he's a magician or something that is like there to impress me. I don't know. I'm just picking things out from the culture, from the culture around me. So I said the prayer, nothing happened. And so I thought, well, I guess nothing is out there, or maybe there's something out there that's impersonal. I did not go back to atheism. I was 100% convinced that atheism was false, but I thought Maybe there's not, the personal God that you hear about so much. So 7 months went by, and I had actually kind of forgotten about it. And then a funny thing happened. I was going to a bookstore to, find some reading to pass the time. I had no particular agenda. And it was a weird thing. As I was walking in the store, the only way I can describe it is to say that it's almost like there was a light on this one book at the back of the room. I mean, there wasn't literally, but I was so drawn to this book. And I just had to go see what it was. And so I had my baby with me, and I pushed the stroller back there. And I laughed when I saw that it was in the Christianity section. I mean, the last time I was in the Christianity section of anything was when I was in the 4th grade. I took the Bibles in our library, and I put them in the fiction section, which I thought was like the most edgy atheist joke the whole 4th grade had ever seen. But I hadn't been back to the Christianity section since. And I was about to walk away, but then I saw that the book was called The Case for Christ. And there was some tagline or something that said that the author used to be an atheist. And I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. This will be fun. Take this book apart. That's, this is just going to be absurd. And I found that the book was actually not too bad. It's, now that I read it, it's written by a Protestant author named Lee Strobel, great guy, but, didn't necessarily have the fullness of truth. I wouldn't necessarily say that the book contains all the answers that you could ever want to know, but for me, at that time, it really planted a seed for me. It really piqued my interest. And one of the things is that I noticed this guy spoke my language. I believed that he was really an atheist. And this is another tip, one that I would find out later. There was something, especially at that time, and I still feel it a little bit, there's something that I would always sense, is that people who had always had faith, it's like we were speaking a different language. They would say something like, don't you feel chained down by the weight of sin? And I would be like, but I don't believe in sin. So we were just constantly missing each other. But this guy and C.S. Lewis and G.K. Chesterton, basically later I would find that what I needed to be doing was seeking out thinkers and authors who were once atheists themselves. And that really, they really knew how to speak my language. So anyway, in The Case for Christ, I'll just give you one example of a point that he made through interviews with Christian experts. He made some points that just kind of got me thinking. I wasn't convinced, but they got me thinking. Like, for example, a Protestant philosopher named J.P. Moreland, Strobel interviewed him, and this guy pointed out that what you see when you look at first century Palestine is that there were all these Jews that for centuries, through unspeakable persecution, they had held to these religious and social structures such as animal sacrifice and keeping the Sabbath, and nothing, not the worst persecution that the world could throw at them would get them to let go of these customs. And this is a quote from him in The Case for Christ. He says, these Jews, they believed that to abandon these institutions would be to risk their souls being damned to hell after death. Now, a rabbi named Jesus appears from a lower class region. He teaches for 3 years, gathers a following of lower and middle class people, gets in trouble with the authorities, and gets crucified along with 30,000 other Jewish men who are also executed during that period. But 5 weeks after he's crucified, over 10,000 Jews are following him and claiming that he is the initiator of a new religion. And get this, they're willing to give up or alter all 5 of the social institutions that they have been taught since childhood have such importance, both sociologically and theologically. And Moreland says, and it's kind of hard to argue with, you have to admit that something explosive happened to Jewish culture in first century Palestine. Atheist or Christian, you have to admit something happened. And his own explanation was simple. They'd seen Jesus risen from the dead. Got me thinking.
It's amazing how God the Father continues, even till this day, to draw people to Jesus, to draw people to his Son, to draw people to himself, to his Son. And people every day continue to hear this gospel and continue to give their life, give their self, give everything to pick up their cross, leaving everything behind and following Jesus. Because they realize that everything else in the world seems like nothing Like the Bible says, it's vanity upon vanity, vanity upon vanity. So when you realize, when you come to this realization, I believe it's the Father doing that work in you. It's the Father igniting you, drawing you back to Himself, drawing you back. And in my last video I talked about the greatest weapon of evangelism, the greatest weapon, the greatest truth, and the greatest weapon in which you can read and say, okay, this is what is going to lead me to Christ. And that weapon is actually in the New Testament. If you read the gospel of Christ in the New Testament, it's actually the greatest weapon, seeing the ministry of the Lord Jesus Christ, seeing His works, seeing His humility, seeing His love, seeing the power, seeing the sacrifice. This is the greatest. If you read this and it doesn't transform your life, I don't know what else can. But like I said, it's the work of the Father to work in you, to help transform you, to bring you back into the fold. And I pray that the Father continues to reach out to His people, continue to make them see the light in Jesus, continue to make them see the light in the gospel of Christ, continue to make them see the light in coming back to God. And in the end, we say thank God. In the end, we say glory to God. In the end, we say thank you for coming. In the end, we say that God gives us the grace to continue to push out the work and for many people to come back to the fold and to honor and to bless the name of the Lord. But in the end, we're all going to make heaven. We all wish to stay blessed. And in the end, we're going to stand and face the final judge, who is Jesus. And He's going to tell us, well done, O good and faithful servants. Well done, well done. That's the aim, that God receives us in the end, because He's going to be the final judge. The aim of all of this is that we stand in judgment seeing Jesus, and He tells us, well done. He tells us, well done. He tells us, well done and welcome. And we see the light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you guys. God bless you.